Hello everyone, I have a Power Flex in front of me here that I need to do a little work on for an upcoming evaluation. This unit is a 15-17 set up for a 16-inch chair, and we have an in-service coming up for a pediatric 12 to 14-inch chair. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to show you some tips and tricks just on setting up a chair in general, but then I'll also walk through how to swap out the adjustment shafts if you need to go from a 12-14 to a 15-17 or maybe up to an 18-20. It's relatively easy, but there are a few tips and tricks that would be good to share. So first I thought I'd go through a real quick inventory of what tools I try to always carry with me. And the first set is just an adjustable set of Allen keys or Allen wrenches. I always make sure I carry both a standard set as well as a metric set. Pretty much everything on the unit is metric. However, we do have a couple of standard bolts on the manual tilt assembly. So it's good just to have a universal set, a multi-tool of Allen keys. I always carry a 1 inch, make sure it goes up to 1 inch, but adjustable box wrench. This is utilized for the large bolt on the outside of the axle receiver if you need to make an adjustment forward or aft. And then probably the tool that I utilize the most, second to the Allen keys, is a 13 millimeter adjustable box wrench. And I like the ratcheting type that allow you to quickly adjust either direction the bolts you'll need. And the 13 millimeter is utilized for both the width adjustment nuts, the height adjustment nuts, as well as the rear manual tilt nut for tightening that. A unique tool that you might need to go get or find is a stubby 10 millimeter Allen wrench. And when I say stubby, what I mean is the length of the upper part here of the Allen key is shorter than normal. So they call them a stubby or a short. You can order these on Amazon. I can send a link out to everybody. But this 10 millimeter is used both to remove this 16 millimeter bolt here on the width adjustment if you need to swap the shafts out. But it's also used in this little pocket right here, and that's why it needs to be stubby, to tighten this bolt right here that adjusts the tension on your camber or folding mechanism of your hand rim bracket. And to make that adjustment, you would need to loosen these two set screws on the right and left, and then you can tighten or loosen these. Sometimes you'll find that this is a little bit loose or a little stiff, and you want to make that a little bit tighter or looser. Loose is the worst. If you're trying to do a demo and these keep falling in on you or they're flopping around, that's no good. So you can tighten that with a 10 millimeter stubby, loosen the two set screws, make that adjustment here, and then tighten everything back up to the point it is a compression joint, to a point where you like where it is, and then set the set screws back in place. So with every unit, there is a Power Flex setup guide. If you haven't read this, you really should. It steps through how to set a chair up from A to Z. It's going to go over everything I'm going to talk about here. The only thing it doesn't have is a couple tips and tricks that I'm going to tell you about, but it tells you how to do the width adjustment, the height adjustment, the axle adjustment. It walks through everything. So if you haven't read it, please do read that and make sure you are familiar with setting up a chair, because that's what we need to do on a day-to-day basis when we're out selling. I always carry a tape measure. Tape measure is handy to make sure you can make sure your dump or your axle height is correct. Also, it's what you're going to use to set up your camber tube axle width. And that's really the key adjustment that you're going to be using for everything. And it doesn't hurt to carry a small persuader. Once we loosen these nuts here and we slide these shafts in and out to set our width, it does come in handy sometimes just to have a little bit of help for a little bit of tap here or a little bit of tap in. These do slide, but they can get a little bit sticky depending on humidity, temperature. We are sliding through some pretty tight tolerance brass bushings. So just a little bit of help sometimes with a small, I call them a persuader, but a rubber mallet would be helpful to carry with you. I always carry blue Loctite. We have a couple of joints that do have blue Loctite on them. Blue is a medium, able to be removed Loctite, but it's for anti-vibration. If you do remove any of those screws during maintenance over the years, you'll want to reapply that blue Loctite. So I just carry that just in case. And then I always carry is just a snip along with some wire ties or zip ties, plastic. So these are always handy if you're modifying the routing of the cable or the joystick or switching from right to left and need to redo the routing. Zip ties are always handy. And then I do always carry this as well. This is a DuPont lithium, white lithium grease. I can put a link out there for that as well. This I utilize if I ever have a squeaky rear manual tilt. So our manual tilt system is a very simple system. It's a shaft inside of a sleeve with a compression spring. And the compression spring can sometimes squeak as it does compress and ride along the aluminum cylinder. WD-40 will work. It's a little bit thinner. I really like this white lithium premium grease. It comes out more like a foam, and you can spray that both into the top slot of the manual tilt as well as up from the bottom, and kind of make sure you cycle that through, and that'll take care of most squeaks and things like that you're gonna have in the system. But I always carry this with me just in case I come across that unit and I'm tuning it up. I can make sure everybody's running really smooth. So those are the tools I carry. I do also carry this multi-tool kit, and this is a great little one. Again, I can send a link out to what I bought. This little kit's really nice. It has a number of tools in it. It has a little bit of a ratcheting set, a screwdriver, a number of tips, both Allen, Phillips, flathead, Torx, extensions, as well as a number of socket heads. There are only a couple of joints that require a socket head on the entire unit. But for instance, this 10 millimeter here fits this nut right here. So if you need to make that adjustment to anything there, this is handy. But I also find that a lot of times when we're working with manual chairs, there's adjustments on the manual chair that somebody might want improved or tweaked, and just having a multi-tool kit really helps. It's small, it's compact, and I always carry it with me. So those are the tools, and now let's look at getting a chair set up. So when you unbox a unit, it's going to be shipped out 15-17 PowerFlex for seat widths between 15 and 17 inch, let's say. This unit was previously set up for a 16-inch tie light. I have the frame right here behind me. And what I always typically do is I start at the beginning with measuring the axle tube length with the wheels removed from axle receiver to axle receiver. And again, you'll take that tape measure. You're gonna get as close as you can. This one's about 17 and a quarter. About 17 and a quarter. So you want to get that measurement close. You can set that aside. And then you're going to come over to the unit, and the first thing you're going to do is loosen the two nuts on the width adjustment. And I want to show you real quick what those bolts are. So these are carriage bolts that simply go into this slot. And when that carriage bolt has a square head underneath the top of the bolt, it sits in that groove and allows this to slide back and forth for your width adjustment. And when you tighten it all together, it's compressing the tube down, holding it in place. So what we're going to be doing is loosening this nut, and you want to loosen it to the point where it's about flush with the bottom of the nut or a little bit further. That's where I take my ratcheting 13 millimeter wrench, and there's a little cutout that allows you to get up in there, and you can go in, make sure you're loosening. But you can loosen that to the point where you can get a finger on it. Do it with the other bolt. And then I usually go down and I just loosen these with my finger until I can feel that it's down to a little bit just past the end of the bolt. And then what I like to do is take the wrench and I like to put it in and kind of just pop this up. So you're going to see if you wiggle this and wiggle this, the head of that is going to pop up, and that gets that square out of the slot. And that's going to allow these to be adjusted and move a lot easier. So once that's popped up, you can give it a little bit more of a loosen if you want. I don't recommend taking those nuts off because often they fall, they get down into the electronics compartment and you're just chasing it. So once that's loose, these shafts then slide in and out. And you can see here, we just popped that one out. And if we go, we can push it in. But sometimes, like I said, these are sticky, and that's where just a little tap in and out can help and go a long ways, especially when you're trying to get down into the fine tuning and dial in that width at the end. And nothing's worse than having one that's a little bit sticky and pounding on it with your hand, especially if you're in front of a client. But just a small tap will usually make that work. On these shafts, we do have little hash marks. So you can see, are you 1, 2, 3, 4 hash marks in from the end? And you want to make sure your hash marks are equal right and left such that the unit is centered on the power flex. So you're going to want to go 3, 4 on each side. But really what you're doing is you're dialing in that 17 1/4 into your axle receiver interface here. So you're going to measure that and you're going to adjust it until you get to about 17 1/4. So we're at 3 on this side, we're at 2 on this side, we need a little bit more. So we're just going to tap that out and let that there we go, right about there. We'll check that measurement again. And we're just a little bit over 17 1/4. So at this point, what I would do is I would drop the chair in. I would see if it's dropping in smoothly. And you're looking for about maybe a 1/16 to an 1/8 inch gap between the axle receivers of the chair and our axle pin interface. And once you have it resting on these little ledges, dropping in smoothly in and out, you can rest it there, you can pop the pins in, and you can actually then just tap these a little bit to make sure it's nice and good. And then slowly tighten these. And then usually this takes 2, 3, 4 times of putting the chair on and off to get the gap and everything working. You don't want the chair to be sticky where it's not dropping in smoothly and it's rubbing on these interfaces or not dropping in. So it may take a couple of times, but what you'll want to do is match that axle receiver width to the width here. And once you have that, you're going to tighten these in. I usually do it right with the chair in. Everything will start to suck down into the slots and you'll have everything tightened up. And you're going to want to make sure those are good and snug because this is a critical joint that you don't want to loosen up as the user's riding. So that's setting your width. Relatively easy. Loosen, pop it up, get the measurement in, bring the chair in and out, make sure it's dropping in smoothly, tighten everything down. From a unit out of the box to full setup, I can typically between 15 and 20 minutes have everything dialed in. The second thing you're going to do once you have the width set is you're going to set the axle height. In our setup guide, we do have a chart that talks about the user weight, what spring you have, a 750 or 1,000 pound shock based upon user weight, and then you're going to get some sag on the suspension as the user sits in there. So we have a little chart that says what hole should you try or start with to get the height. But if you're running a 24-inch wheel and you need a 12-inch axle height, a lot of times you can set that just so this is right at 12. And then if the user does sit in it and sag just a little bit, they're going to have just slightly more dump, which typically isn't a bad thing. but you're gonna wanna keep them right around that 12 inches for that 24-inch wheel. But if you need to go to a 25-inch wheel, maybe a 26-inch wheel that somebody's riding, or if you're working with pediatrics, which we're gonna be doing here in a little bit and switching everything over, and you need to go down to maybe a 22-inch wheel, you will have to make an adjustment here. So to adjust the axle height, it's really quite simple. There's 3 bolts here on this assembly. You're gonna remove the front bolt and just loosen the back 2, and that'll allow this assembly to work. So it's a 6mm on the head, and then it's the same 13mm on the back side. And then you can carefully remove the nut, and there is a split lock washer on here for anti-vibration. You can pull that, and this here you can pull out. So with that one removed, you can then loosen the back 2. And you just need to loosen them just a little bit, and you can see already our swing arm assemblies that we call them can now pivot up and down, and that's where we're getting that axle height. So if you've ever been wondering how that works, we have a number of holes in this plate here that'll allow you to line things up and get to that, height that you need. So once you measure your height, line it up, use the chart in the book, whatever you want to do, you can then put this bolt back through, line it up with the hole, put your split lock washer back on, and your nut. And once that is all set, simply tighten them down. This joint doesn't necessarily need to be gorilla tight, but give it a good snug twist. And now your height is set. So with your width set and your height set, you can drop your chair in. So once you have your chair dropped in and the height is set, and this is in the setup guide as well, you're gonna wanna make sure the spacing between the front caster and your drive wheel is a good 1.5 to 2 inches, such that when the frame flexes or if you have frog legs, that this wheel can't contact the drive wheel ever. And it also controls how compact the chair is. So you might find that, you have a 4 or 5 inch gap between here, and maybe you want to bring that back. You can do that by altering the position of the axle receiver in this paddle. So you can move that forward or backward to change the gap between the caster wheel and the front wheel to make it compact or not compact. That's where your 1-inch wrench comes in. So with that, you can come over to the axle nut. You can loosen that. And with this T-handle pulled back, what you're gonna do is completely spin that nut off the threads. And then this whole assembly simply pushes through forward, and then you can slide this forward and backwards. So it does kind of pull completely off. These little screws right here are what aligns it on that paddle. But you can decide where you want it. You can line it up then with the, there's 8 little half moons that allow that to move forward and aft. But once you kind of line it up, you can take the axle receiver, push it back through, tighten the nut, and then I always just make sure on the right and left side I have equal spacing. So like here I have about 1 moon. On the other side we're at 2. So I just, when I was adjusting that, moved it forward. So we certainly can just move it back to make sure we're equal right and left. It's critical they are the same right and left, so always make sure you do check that. So we are just going to then pull this back. one spot. Push that receiver back through the assembly, tighten that nut down, and then you're going to want to make sure that that joint is nice and snug as well. So we have width set, we have height set, we have the axle position set. As we talked about, I would then drop my chair back in. And then what I typically do to make sure everything is seated before adjusting the manual tilt is I'll make sure that the chair is actually down, both arms are even, it's in the suspension, and I'll just kind of pull it down before I then take and adjust the rear manual tilt. All right, once everything is down and in place, we're then going to align the clamp with the rigidizer bar, and that's simply a 5mm on this one nut right here that clamps the tube assembly. So you can loosen that. And that allows this to slide up and down to reach the rigidizer bar wherever it might be on the manual chair. What I typically do is with the jaws open, I like to bring it up to the rigidizer bar, put it in, and then rest the bottom of the clamp up onto the bar, and then tighten the top down. So with everything there, this is still loose. If we were to pivot this, the rod slides through the clamp, which isn't what we want. But once we have this positioned where we want it, we can come back, tighten this with the 5mm Allen. This one needs to be pretty good and snug, and we're clamping that tube. And now when you tilt, the shaft is compressing the spring inside of this tube. And this is staying in place, and that's where we get our manual tilt. And that's the complete setup, kind of start to finish. Okay, so now let's swap out our pivot shafts or our width adjustment shafts. As I stated, this is a 15 to 17 inch unit. We have an eval coming up for a 12 to 14. So we need to make this unit smaller. The great news is all we have to do is replace this one shaft. I have the shorter shafts right here with me, and we'll walk through that process here. All right, so you will need a 10mm Allen. You can use the stubby if you have it, or you can use a standard for this particular joint. But right here we have a single bolt that takes this swing arm and assembles it onto the shaft. So we're gonna remove this bolt, pull off the swing arms, and then we'll take the shafts out. So these M16 bolts are a very coarse thread. They do have a blue Loctite on them. So if you have a brand new unit out of the box and you're swapping shafts for the very first time, this joint could be very tough to break the first time. That blue Loctite on these coarse threads has done a very nice job of making this a secure connection. So I've had a couple people that have done this already. They did need to use a breaker bar and put a longer bar or tube over their Allen wrench to get leverage to break it for the very first time. I've also seen a little bit of a shock load or an impact wrench. If you have an impact wrench with a 10mm bit that you can get on that, it might break it. A lot of times it will just break free with a little bit of force. I have this one in here, and there it went. So I always take these out before I do anything with these two center bolts. They'll have to come out as well. But if you take these out first, the shaft is gonna rotate and you won't get any leverage. So before you do anything, take the two large M16 bolts out. And we are working on changing that blue Loctite to a split lock washer on this joint so that it will be easier for repair and adjustment in the field if you need to swap them out. So that change is coming, but once that bolt is removed, you can take the swing arm assembly and you can kind of rock it off. And just the shaft will be left, and this whole assembly here can just be set aside and we're gonna put it back. One thing I do wanna note though, is this opening here is a little bit of a D shape. So it's rounded with two flats, and the shaft, you'll notice, has two flats as well. And when you put this back together, it is a very tight tolerance. You're gonna wanna make sure you get that to slide on perfectly and get it all the way seated before you put this joint back together. I have seen a couple where that's only partially seated, and then this here ends up getting a little slop in it. So just make sure when you reassemble that the flats with the swing arm and the pivot shaft are coming completely together and fully installed when you get that back on, because you're going to kind of guide it in, and then you want to make sure it's all the way in. And you can tell because it'll be flush, pivot shaft to swing arm flats on the inside of here. So for now, pop that off, set it aside. On the joystick side, if you have any zip ties routing the cable along the front of the pivot shaft, you'll need to snip those, but then the routing on the hand rim bracket can remain, and we're gonna remove that bolt as well. So with that out, we then, and these bolts still in, that'll allow you to wiggle this. Maybe take your persuader, give it a little bit of a tap, and that entire assembly again can just be brought down and set aside to the outside here. All right, now all we need to do is remove the shaft. So these two bolts need to come out completely. So this time that nut will actually have to come off. So we'll spin that off. You're gonna wanna carefully, to the best of your ability, bring that nut down to the end and pull it, the washer and the split lock washer, off of the threads. It's a little bit tight. If you drop everything, it's not a big deal. Okay, and again, I like to just take my wrench, go under here, and pop that up, and you can take this carriage bolt right out. With the carriage bolt out, this shaft can be turned out. You'll notice some of the bronze from the bronze bushing rubs off on it. That's completely normal. But this is your 15 to 17 inch shaft. Take it out, set it aside, don't throw it away. You'll need it later when you go back to your other unit. You then can take your smaller 12 to 14 or your larger 18 to 20, whichever direction you're going. You can then slide that in, and you're gonna align the slot with the hole and the hole. We're gonna take our carriage bolt. We're gonna align that back up. We're gonna make sure the square drops down into the slot. Washer, split lock, nut. So standard washer goes on first. That provides a flat square surface for our nut to go against this rounded tube. Then our split lock. And then our nut. Nut's the trickiest part. And you'll just want to try and get that started on the threads. And leave that loose, because you're going to need to make an adjustment with the new chair that you're going to be popping in. So you don't need to tighten that up quite yet. And then we're going to do the other same thing on this side here. And then you can pop up this carriage bolt. And slide out the shaft. All right, if you do run into a situation of a sticky shaft that doesn't want to slide out easily, like I said, we have a pretty tight tolerance running through this brass bushing, and depending on humidity, temperature, things like that, it can get a little bit bound up, especially when a unit's been used for a while. This demo unit I've had for quite a while. So what you can do is once that bolt is removed, we've already loosened this nut, this bolt. What I did is I put the swing arm assembly back on, and I didn't tighten this down, but I have it just resting, you know, such that the joint is connected. You can see here it's just a little bit loose, right? But I have it just barely snug. And that'll give you a little bit of leverage that you then can use to get that shaft and pull it out. And then once that shaft is out, because you don't need to break this bolt anymore, you can just turn that out and disconnect that shaft. All right, so you set that shaft apart, take your other 12 to 14. You're gonna slide it in here. All right, so once you have that slid in place, you can then go in and put that carriage bolt back in, lining up the holes in the head, flat washer, lock washer, nut. And again, you can leave that just a little bit loose. All right, so we have our shafts replaced. As you can see, things sometimes can be a little finicky. At probably best if you can swap shafts out back at your shop rather than trying to do it in front of a group full of people. Once the shafts are in and you have your bolts on, you then can bring your swing arm assemblies back. And again, we're going to carefully line up those D's. There we go. You can feel it slide in. You can feel it flush on the inside. You then can take your washer with your M16. If you're going to be going back and forth, you wouldn't have to put blue Loctite back on this. But because it is a joint that can vibrate, and we don't want that coming off, if you are making a fix for a client or an eval, and it's going to be their unit for a while, I would put a little blue Loctite on those threads and then put that back in. And then that joint there, you're going to want to come in and snug it up pretty good. All right, on the other side, we're going to make sure we have this finger tight so that the shaft stays in place. Take our swing arm assembly. Line it up. And make sure we get our flats aligned. There we go. Everything's slid in nice and flush. Put that on the threads. And then we can bring that back in here. All right. And then snug that up. All right. So with your shafts swapped, you can see now we have a much narrower unit. We would go through and do a very similar thing. We would take our new frame. I have a Key Rogue 12 by 12 chair right here. We would come in, measure our axle. It looks like end to end, this one is about 14.5. And this one was running 24-inch wheels, so the 12-inch adjustment that we have on the height can remain. But we are then gonna have to try and zero in the 14.5 between our two receivers here. So we're at about 14.25, so we'll need to tap those out a little bit and make sure everything is centered. Come back, try and line it up. And we're resting right now a little bit bigger gap than I would like. But as we talked about, once we bring the axle receivers in, you'll notice with that 4-degree camber, this tilts in a little bit. But you could just then give it a little bit of tap on each side while it's in and bring up that gap just a little bit. So right now I have a nice gap. I can take the chair and the axle receivers, pull those in and out. Chair removes. I can come back in, guide it in for a nice demo. Into my axle receivers. Lock it in. Lock it in. And I have my chair at a pretty good spot right now. So with that in place and the chair still in, I'm going to go ahead and tighten these. So tighten those up. And then I always triple check and just make sure everything's coming in smoothly before I go to the next step. So we got the right side, we got the left side. Chair goes out, chair comes in with that 4 degrees of camber. Yeah, so pretty good. Line that up, line that up. And you'll notice as I'm putting the axles in, I'm picking the chair up a little bit, and that's to align the axle with the pins. Not every axle receiver is magically going to line up just because you rested it on the little troughs we have. The distance, the thickness, everything, the camber. Like I said, these are at 4 degrees camber, so they're pointed up a little bit. So you will have to sometimes lift the chair up just a little bit for the axle receivers to pop in. You might need to tilt the hand room a little bit to get them to pop in and align. But just slow and easy, a little bit of finesse always works. And once that's popping in smoothly, you're good. All right, as you can see, we're not aligned on our manual tilt mechanism. I'm gonna make sure everything is seated and looking good there. We then take our 5mm, loosen this, and that allows this to slide up and down. So we are going to bring it in, we're going to open the jaws, we're going to align it to the bottom jaw up to the unit. We're going to tighten the clamp down. And from that position, we can tighten things back up. So we're going to tighten that 5mm on the clamp down below. Make sure that's good and snug. And now we have our manual tilt for our pediatric chair all set up and aligned. So, and there we are. We just went from a 15-17 to a 12 to 14 inch unit, getting ready for an eval that we have on Thursday. Thanks. Any questions, let me know. Like I said, read the setup guide, get familiar with your unit, make some adjustments, prep the unit before you head out, and you should have good luck. Overall, it's a pretty simple system. Just takes a little bit to get used to the adjustments and where you're headed. So, thanks.